Welcome to the Bike Shed podcast, where we talk about all things software engineering, Dunkin' versus Starbucks coffee, and which AI company will go public first. I'm your co-host, religious Raycast Reddit poster, Scott K. And alongside with me are my co-hosts. He took the application code you shipped yesterday and already refactored it. Matt, one version ahead, Hamlin. And my other co-host. He's hot like sriracha, dropping fervent takes that sting like Szechuan. Dylan, spicy take curry. Fellas, what are we up to today?
Today, we're going to talk about internal tooling, specifically why internal tooling sucks, or at least that's my take. Maybe Dylan and Scott have alternative takes. But we want to dig into like what is internal tooling and why it's usually bad, or maybe like what are the pros and cons of it.
It's always good, Matt. There's never a bad internal tooling code.
Yeah, maybe. I haven't seen that, but maybe.
Maybe it's all bad. That's how I feel, but we'll get to that.
Dylan, do you want to define what we mean when we say internal tooling?
To me, it's something that's owned by the company you work for. Maybe your team owns it. Maybe some other team within your company owns it. But what does own it even mean? Like, what is the internal tool that we're talking about? I think like giving specific examples here would be helpful. Like, is it a spreadsheet we put things into, and then people look at it later, or is it like some website that we built that people insert data into, and then it's like it's a custom CMS and that's like shown onto a site? Like, there's so many different versions of what an internal tool could be. I feel like even the examples I gave were kind of bad.
Well, I think it's also like just intrinsically difficult to give examples of internal tool, right? Because like an internal tool at HubSpot is going to be different from one at Whoop, from one at Airbnb, et cetera. Like maybe some of them are going to overlap in terms of solving a similar problem, but it's not like I can rattle off a name, for example, and people listening to the pod will immediately understand like what we're talking about.
I think it's easier, and I think you're going to get there, is like talk about an external tool that maybe your company or other companies build internal versions of, or something similar, or wrappers around.
Yeah, one example for HubSpot that came to mind as I was thinking of this topic is we have this tool called GitHub Manager, which is a internal website UI for managing settings across the repos that your team owns. So traditionally, if you wanted to change a setting for a repository in GitHub, you would go to that repo and then go into the settings tab and then tinker with the settings that you wanted to change. This is like a custom UI that we like visit and like opens a drawer and for each repo that you want to edit, and you can like change different default settings or like, things like apply, or require specific checks to pass before PRs can be merged, opting into auto merge, configuring code owners, stuff like that. It's like managed through this internal tool instead of going to GitHub itself to manage those settings. So that's one example from HubSpot. I don't know, Scott, do you have an example in mind for Airbnb that you can share without bleeping too much?
Literally work on an internal tool, which we've talked about before. Yeah, so I work on something called Flow Builder for like the next week or two before I switch over to a different internal tool. And basically that tool allows engineers to format JSON in a workflow tool for what AI output might occur for UI on site, mostly like chatbots. I guess like the value of that, and probably what I will argue as the best values of internal tools, are things like security and maybe some customizations. So you can have all of your internal data or sensitive data in this tool very easily. Now, it might not always want to be intertwined with the tool, especially if you're open sourcing it. Like we definitely use third parties libraries as part of this tool, but one could argue a tool like this could be built and then teams could put their data into it. But it does allow you to easily like marry your data into your application, and it gives you some security.
Yeah, that's something actually, like you saying that you work on internal tools didn't click for me with this topic until just now, in the sense of like, I don't intend to say that your job is not delivering value, but I think with my premise that internal tools suck, I think it's maybe we'll have some interesting maybe points to dig into there.
I feel like what we're gonna get to, and maybe this is just my take, is we all work on internal tools. Maybe that's a weird take. Maybe Matt's gonna burst into flames.
The difference is the perspective of the internal tool and like the audience. Whereas like the internal tools Matt works on are like kind of like external third party tools that all teams need to consume. Whereas the tool I work on, it's a smaller subset of people who need to consume it, and may just be a different audience. So like yeah, we'll dig into this more, but there isn't. Well, there are probably now open source tools that are like Flow Builder, but when it was built, there weren't, right? So there wasn't like a clear common um, solution that companies were running with. So one could make an argue that we want to build this tool and we don't want to put the effort in to being the owners and open sourcing it, but rather let's just build it and solve the problem we have at hand, because that's the main goal versus like we need to support 20,000 engineers, or sorry, 2,000 engineers or something, versus I probably support maybe like 100, and we replace writing code with UI to streamline the speed of what we're doing. So it is a little different. So audience is a big key factor here.
Yeah, I think not necessarily to pivot us away from that. I think that's an interesting topic also, but I also wanted to like some framing that I had thought of while thinking of this topic was generally, from what I've seen, there's sort of like two different kinds of internal tools. One is like a tool that wraps an existing tool. So the example I provided earlier of like this GitHub manager, it's like sort of wraps the functionality that GitHub already provides, just in maybe a nicer interface, or something that can be, provide additional context for internal tools and or internal users, and maybe provides additional functionality. But then I think that there's like another bucket that's like internal tools that are effectively complete alternatives to existing, external tools, for lack of a better term, tools that are common in an industry. These are probably ones that are even harder for us to give examples to, I think. You guys feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here, but like one example that comes to mind with HubSpot is like we have an internal dependency manager for our front end packages at HubSpot, which is basically an alternative to NPM, yarn, PNPM, etc. And it's like not built on top of those things. It's like a completely different custom system that manages our dependencies and manages installing dependencies and resolving them. And so like that's an example in my mind that like falls in the second bucket. I don't know if you guys have like better examples or more clear examples.
I can give one. Like Whoop is a smaller company. That's where I work. So honestly, like mostly what we use is external tooling. It's just that's the way. Like we're like a late stage startup, so we're just like grabbing random third party things and trying to get things working as quickly as we can. But they do have a tool internally called Easy Deploy, which is sort of like Backstage that's fully homegrown, and the like infra team owns it. But it's kind of like service, discoverability is all in one place, and then you can like manage deploys and roll pods and like discover tech docs for all the different Java services they own. But it has its own issues. Like I could complain about it all day, but I won't because I'm a good employee. No, but it's actually kind of good. But maybe we'll get to like why companies end up building internal tools. I think that what ends up happening is the bigger you get, the less like that external tool like is a one size fits all for your company, and then you start to discover that you need like specific support for very specific things, and then you try to get that company to do it for you, and they're too slow and they're too expensive, so you just eventually you cave and you say, all right, we're going to hire some people to just build an internal tool to do that thing for us. I feel like that's kind of why this happens, but curious on y'all's takes.
One other aspect besides just growing large is just that the existing tooling doesn't solve your current day needs as well. So like I think you can definitely grow the gap between like the problem you need to solve versus what the external tool solves, like definitely grows over time as your company grows. But I think also you can start from a point where you have a specific problem you need to solve and none of the external tooling available already solves it. And so then you like basically from the get-go you decide to go in a different path.
That's exactly what I was going to say. There's a few examples of like sometimes we build this internal tool because there isn't a third-party solution there yet. That's basically what I was talking about with Flow Builder and maybe some of the tools that you deal with. Also, yeah, you have a unique problem that the external tool can't solve, or it doesn't have a part of this exactly the solution you need, which could be the difference between creating your own tool uh, or just wrapping the tool and adding some layer on top of it. So there might be some like layer of, again, sensitive data that you need to add, or it just doesn't do something. Um, yeah, so basically it usually comes down to the use case you're describing, Matt, where it's like there's some unique thing about what we're doing, or the vision is like, oh, we're different and we need to make this change to support.
Yeah, I think there's like a very small percentage chance where like the internal tool sort of predates the external tool also. It like in a sense where like the path was proven right of like the company went down a different path than what maybe other companies are doing for solving a specific use case. And then maybe reach the stage where it's like actually more like general enough that any other company could adopt it. And you know, like maybe a good example here is like Borg from within Google, which is like a pre-Kubernetes concept. Like that's how Google deploys things, and as my understanding is Borg, and they basically took maybe the good parts, I don't know, maybe some parts of it, and extracted it out as Kubernetes and open source it. Is my like I could be getting that completely wrong, but that's my loose understanding of it. So that's maybe a good example where you know a company went and built an internal tool to solve a use case they had that was different from the existing solutions, and then ultimately it became popular enough that you know other companies started to adopt it as the standard as well. But I think that's generally a pretty rare case. And I would say like you know, maybe this is getting a little bit to my core thesis, maybe too early, but I think generally speaking, like that case where a company decides that an external tool just doesn't meet the use cases and they start building from scratch a new thing, I think 90% of the time that's like maybe the wrong decision. And yeah, maybe that's the hot take is maybe 90% feels too strong.
One thing that I was thinking of, and maybe this is a weird approach to this conversation, is sometimes you just have somebody in your company who's like a subject matter expert. Maybe they've like maybe they work like on the React core team or something. And then they're just like, you know what? We could do this ourselves. I've already done it before. Let's just like spin up our own version of this. We'll have full control over it. I think there are cases like this. Both of us have probably worked with people that can do this kind of stuff. I think of like Artie in one case where he just has like a deep understanding of JavaScript and able to like create libraries that solve problems that maybe aren't even like open sourced. Specifically, something called Jambox that we used in the past that could like snapshot server requests for end-to-end tests. It was kind of clunky, but there wasn't really anything else out there that was off the shelf and easy to use. And maybe Matt can tell me I'm wrong and we should have been using something else. And I'll be like, that's great. I'm going to use that at Whoop. But I think there's like special cases where you have people that are just really smart and there's a specific problem that you can't solve or you're having trouble solving. And it's like a really good opportunity to build something in internal.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example of it could be good, it could be bad. It depends, like totally. Because I think I immediately thought of Tungsten, which was Wayfair's basically React substitute. They wanted to try to keep the platform they had and go down with this MVC framework that they had and try to build a solution that worked for them, where they had one person who knew it really well. And I'm not saying like this is wrong. Like Jambox actually probably could have been the right solution for the problem at the time. There just wasn't enough buy-in for that. It's a different example that we were talking about. But I think the overarching concepts here is like cost first. Like it takes a big cost to support these things. If you have one engineer that knows how to do this, that's not ideal. Just because one engineer is really smart and can bang something out, that's not going to help with the cost. Everyone needs to learn about it. Anyone who comes in now needs to learn how this tool might work, depending on how important it is to the overall structure of what they're building. And then it needs support, right? Like you need to work on it all the time, or you need to document it well. And then the usability of it has to be really good. So there needs to be not just engineers on it. There needs to be people who are designers or like understand how the workflow should work. It's great that we can build something, but like if the patterns aren't great, like one of the reasons React is so used is I think the patterns are fairly easy to understand once you get them. I'm not saying like all the hooks, but just the concept of you build something once and then you reuse it is kind of a simple pattern. And I think that really helped a lot. And obviously there's a huge community of support there. And because it's an external tool, you have support, which is a pro of external tools, right? And people can come in and know how this thing works. So it's kind of a double-edged sword depending on what you're building, and you really have to really think these things through. Smaller things maybe make sense for someone who's really intelligent to just build if it can be documented well and the cost isn't that high. But the tools like Matt's talking about, like Bun, NPM, yarn replacements, and Noah said I try to argue for internal tools, but I don't know if I could argue for that one specifically. It just seems redundant and now difficult. Your whole architecture relies on something like that. The cost of that is absolutely massive, and I think that's the number one factor to weigh here.
Yeah, I kind of like the concept you're maybe talking about there, Scott, of like there's like so many sharp edges with building an internal tool. And I especially on onboarding, which is like something I've been feeling sort of acutely. I mean, I've been here almost a year now, but it's still like kind of crazy that there's like things I don't know that I should maybe know that are like basically like sort of maybe not in a daily but like weekly used internal tools. Weekly in the sense of like someone might use this once a week at least. Yeah, I don't know. There's just like so many like places where you need added polish and added quality in order to make it easy to use. Whereas like if it's an external tool that you've adopted, then it's like you kind of get to lean on the fact that maybe someone joining a company has experience with using that tool at the previous company, right? Like GitHub is a good example as like sort of a standard, I think like Git Forge or Git Backend that most engineers will know and recognize, right? And so they'll know how to use it when they join sort of day one versus having to learn, something completely custom like as they onboard.
One thing that scares me about internal tools, especially like when you join a company, like maybe I'm just going off of what Matt just said, is when like you're not sure if the person that created it or the people that maintain it are even still at the company sometimes. And then maybe there's somebody who's like contributed to it, but all they've done is like make a one-line change. They don't even know it. So then like when you go to look for somebody for help on that tool, you're like, oh, let's go look at the contributors list. And it's just people that have tweaked it and know nothing about it. And eventually it just becomes like this lone project that everyone's scared of. I don't know nowhere else to go with that, but yeah, that's a big argument against internal tools is if they're not properly owned and continued to be owned and like taken care of, then they turn into a big issue for your company.
There's also like kind of along that same line of thinking is like there's also decisions that are lost to time for internal tools. Like it's like it's like hard to tell if like is this a feature or is this a bug or is this just like unknown, like undefined behavior of this internal tool. Like the person that implemented it 10 years ago, did they think about this use case, or did they not? And it's like hard to say because yeah, the person might not be at the company anymore, or if they are, they've moved completely away from it, or like, or even if they are and they're working on the same team, they probably can't remember what they thought about 10 years ago, right? Because it probably wasn't documented. So I think there's like, you could see that the same with external tooling, but I feel like with external tooling, like usually there's more care and polish put into it than with internal tooling.
Yeah. With external tooling, there's so many more stakeholders and there's more like a larger expectation from those people that you write out your architecture decision record or whatever. I don't know if you guys use those, but I've been thinking about that recently. I've been making a lot of decisions within my company and I don't document it properly. And then somebody comes to me like months later and they're like, why did we do this? And I'm like, well, it's in my head. Let me just tell you. And they're like, why isn't it written down? And that's probably a common problem with internal tooling. And I think with external, it's like there's a lot more pressure from the public to sort of fill in that documentation over time and keep it up to date.
I mean, I feel like it's hard to write everything down on why you make a decision on something. You could be doing docs for months. You have to execute at some point. Like we do docs, but we try to like really emphasize like don't put too much time into them. Like we can do more and more docs. Let's just make sure we're all on the same page. But sorry, that's just an aside comment. But I think it comes back to like what you folks have been talking about is like buy-in. Like you need all the buy-in for these tools, and everyone needs to be on board and agreed to that we're going to use them. I think a lot of the tools we talk about not being successful as well are actually tools that like engineers need to extend and not like the end tools that like Flow Builder is where the audience happens to be engineers, but like tools where the audience is like people who work internally or partners, suppliers, where they just need to see data, like user data or numbers. Like those kinds of tools are often built in house, but they work. Versus it's really like these framework level tools almost, where it's something that the engineering system might rely on heavily, and then that needs to be carried forward for the rest of the company's existence, or it could be really difficult to migrate off of it. So when knowledge transfer occurs or doesn't occur, it creates these situations where people are afraid of it, a la Bagel at Wayfair, or yeah, Tungsten. Like I think that actually Jambox was a good example of a tool that could work. I do think there are probably solutions now. But it was a tool that could work. It just needed the buy-in that it didn't have, where an engineer really built like a problem, a solution, and we were not dedicating time to it. We're dedicating time to other things. And there should have been parallel tracks there. And leadership needs to sell this is a solution to solve this large problem engineers are facing. So part of it could be that. I think it is replaced now. I think Yair said by like playwright testing, which I guess makes sense. But the point is like even if you do that, like that's just still a smaller subset problem that is easy to replace. Whereas again, like if your package manager that manages hundreds of packages or thousands of packages in your org needs to be replaced, I could see that being a really, really big rewrite.
It kind of dovetailing into what you were saying there, Scott. I think the maybe the core realization that I'm having also is like even if you have an internal sort of maybe developer tooling team or organization or like sort of a team an org focused on building and maintaining these internal tools, I think it'll always be second to whatever your like company is solving, right? Like what is your core thing value that your company provides? Like even if you have an org focused on this, it's like yes, that org it'll be their primary focus, but that org, the value to the company is like maybe second to sales or whatever, right? Like second to a customer facing part of the company. So I think it's really just like, yeah, it comes down to investment, right? And I think it's almost impossible to find a company that will give the accurate amount of, or like the right amount of investment into internal tooling to make sure it is well maintained and well supported and It continues to solve the needs and stays up to date and things like that.
So I guess we're now like kind of in a place where it's like, when do you pick one or the other? And like, what are the pros and cons? Like, I keep bashing on this example, but a package manager is probably not a good place to, or a good hill to die on for, we're going to build a custom tool that will need to support forever. But I think some of the things we've brought up are, I remember we built internal tracking mechanisms, which maybe that's not even the best use case. You could probably use one, but maybe the system you're working within already has constraints where you can't use a third party. So it's like, look at cost, look at the support it's going to take, how many people that does it impact, how does it hurt security, and how much customization do you really need, and how much effort is it going to be to scale what you're building. So these are just like kind of some rules of thumb, and before you do it. But we didn't really talk about like why you might need to wrap a third party in something, like all of the things we do here. I think I brought it up briefly, but I might wrap something when, you get maybe like, let's just say some percentage of all of the things from an open source tool, but you need to either wrap sensitive data or some sort of other features you need to roll with it. You could also fork something if things don't work well. I would actually say that that's likely dangerous unless you can avoid it, or you know that it's going to come soon with that package. But I've seen, well, Bagel's an example of forked and then changed so much. You're almost, I don't want to say you're always better off building your own thing, but maybe you're better off like solving the problem in a separate space and then marrying two items before you just go rogue, or maybe building your own if you can support the cost.
Like one thought comes to mind is like, it's interesting, at least so far from my experience, it's interesting that there's always like most tools solve a 90% use case, at least maybe that's a sweet spot. And, sometimes they solve less of a use case for a company, sometimes a little bit more, but I found it pretty difficult to find examples where an external tool 100% meets the internal use case, which makes me wonder, like, obviously a company is making a tool and selling the tool, right? Like GitHub and Microsoft now is like selling GitHub as a tool. Why would they settle for selling a tool that's 90% the use case, right? And so like it makes me wonder, like, maybe that's not the case, right? Like, but like, how did we get here in the first place, right? Like, how is it possible that it just seems that most places maybe don't have 100% overlap with the tools that are available in the market, basically. I guess you could boil it down to like companies are different and unique.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
I feel like you're about to get into like philosophy or something. I just think it's impossible for a tool to solve every use case. Like for your company or your code base, you're always going to have like 150 tools sort of working together to solve your problems. And there's going to be tons of overlap. So
This kind of reminds me of the product card at Wayfair, where they wanted to build one that could be used for any use case, and then the answer was like, okay, it's too hard to use. You can't solve problems for use cases you can't see coming. Like maybe some of them, but like if you have to outline as much of the use cases as possible. That's why maybe this isn't the best example, but like Next, for example, it has multiple third-party plugins that also support it, because not every website needs login. Not every website needs all the features that will come with it out of the box. So it's like we build a basic thing and then we provide more and more features as we see fit, or as other companies see fit or need.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. I'm curious, like, I guess maybe to get us back on topic here. It sounds like we're maybe landing on the classic Scottism of it depends, in terms of like whether to build internal tooling or not. I think I like entered this conversation thinking like a strong like don't build internal tools basically as like the default state, but maybe I'm getting more swayed towards like the it depends case, where it's like a little bit closer to a not necessarily 50-50, but like closer to it. You have more of a like maybe there's more opportunities to reach for internal tooling versus always adopting external tooling.
I feel like we're landing on more of like, don't build internal tools that already exist for like 90% of your use case. Like that is a fool's errand, right? Because why would I want to rebuild a thing? Like just because it doesn't support 10% of the use case, we can build on top of it, or we can build a secondary thing that works with it. Let's not just frivolously build something to say we did it. That we like, and then look at the cost. Like, how foundational to your entire organization is what you're building? Are you building something that like could be replaced in a few days? Like, what is the impact that it will have? Just asking the right questions before you do something, other than just being a gung ho engineer that can't wait to build something that doesn't exist. There's just like a lot more factors, and it requires some diligent attention. I almost feel like we should maybe with this episode, or come up with like a what we see as a guide to like when would you do one versus the other. Maybe it could be a Venn diagram, or a web I don't know, some sort of diagram. I just thought a Venn diagram sounded cool, even though probably doesn't solve the problem at all. But basically, it's like very situational, and you should really think through the investment that it'll take.
Yeah, and it seems like we sort of at the outset we sort of laid this framing of like there's internal tools that wrap external tools, and then there's internal tools that are like completely different, or replicate an external tool versus like wrapping it. And it seems like the first bucket of like wrapping an external tool can be completely reasonable, or like is easier to validate or to reason about and adopt, versus the one that like the second bucket is like maybe there's a higher sort of impedance curve that you need to meet before you make the decision to replicate an external tool.
Yeah, we're getting to our every engineer's favorite topic, which is like long-term cost analysis of the decisions you make. That's your favorite thing that your manager can ask you. How much is this going to cost us? I'm just like, when Scott was having that example, all I could think of is like a company deciding that Cursor is just not good or something. And so they're like, oh, well, VS Code is open source, so we're just going to build our own version of this. And I bet you there's companies out there that are doing this. And they just have like 5 engineers wasting away their time trying to like build a Cursor clone internally. And maybe that was a hot take, and maybe Airbnb's already doing that.
We use the appropriate plugins. We trialed Cursor. It was just not that popular. I guess like there's a lot of plugins with VS Code now that you can just basically do the exact same thing. So yeah, I agree with you though. Someone's probably building that. They're probably like, well, we could do AI in our code editor faster.
And honestly, they're probably not wrong. It's just, is it gonna be worth the investment long term? Did they do that like homework up front? Like
Or
you're
also, are
talking
you
about?
going to sell it? Like, what's the point of making your
Yeah,
workflow faster if you're not like, I don't know.
maybe it's like 5 cents less per token because they did it themselves or something. They're going direct to the like open API.
Yeah. Oh my God. Now you're reminding me of a certain job Matt and I had where it's like, let's just build everything ourselves because it costs less and it's easy, right? That's another thing. You're making me think of like when we built our own dev keys setup and we were like,
Is this when you were at your like for that smaller startup?
yeah, when we were working at Fireworks, we basically, it was really expensive to store our API keys through Google, if I remember correctly. And we found a smaller place, but we had to build out essentially a middleware for it. And that was like, oh, it's just like this simple middleware that will take like a month, maybe. It was like a painstaking 3 to 6 month process for folks, with only like 2 engineers working on it. And yeah, it saved and it was probably worth it. But like sometimes you have to look at like, does it, should we pay more now so or hire more people to do something before like it maybe I don't know the state of the company more if it was the right call or not, but like what is the amount that it costs, and what would be the amount of a couple of engineers who need to work on it, and like how can we factor that in versus just saying, oh, it's easy, it'll take a month. Always, I mean, I've been guilty of this lately, but always just assume it takes long, like at least 1/3 plus longer than you think it's going to take with good intentions.
One thing you made me think of when you were saying that is if a company decides like, oh, we're going to take on this internal tool, it's going to take us 2 months, can they halfway through decide like, oh, we didn't do enough research, there's actually something better? Can they just like stop themselves and cancel the project and like pivot?
Yes, Arlo at Wayfair, we spent an entire year building an interior design project to catch up to another project. This is another example where, and sorry, I'll try to be quick here, but basically, I had been thinking about this example. We wanted to build an interior design app to catch up to this competitor that was 1 year ahead of us. And when we started, the backend engineer, Ross, kept asking, like, are you sure we need to do this with no Wayfair related things? Like Wayfair, people can't know it's related to Wayfair. Like we had to build everything from scratch. So we created like a 3 to 6 month hole, like building from scratch. And then a year later, after we built and launched the product, they were like, oh, well, the product we were working against also spent a year and about as many people. There were 17 people working on this project, engineers, and they were still a year ahead of us. So they just deemed it like, oh, we can't possibly beat them. And instead of rolling it out with like keep the lights on and try to get some users, they just folded one of the two of the features that we built into like the lists on Wayfair. I don't know if that still exists, but I remember being really disappointed. It's like, why not just put it out there and then give it to a team to own bugs and like have 1 or 2 engineers use it? You just invested like millions of dollars on a product that you're not even going to launch.
Dang, that sucks.
Yeah, I mean, I like
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I don't care, but like they could have made money off of it. Even I feel the same way. All right, I'm going rabbit holing, but I feel the same way about the registry. If they just kept it, it's money you're gonna make.
All right. Before we move on, I had a couple hot takes because my takes aren't spicy enough. Is what I was told. But these are more against like external tooling. I feel like maybe we didn't talk about this much, but I think external tooling kind of sucks. And the reason is whoever owns it, it could be privately owned. Maybe open source is a little bit better, but at some point in time, it can just stop being maintained. And then what do? You fork it or you like move on, you find something new. That can be like really disruptive for your company. Another thing is new versions will come out that feel like almost impossible to migrate to. You just don't have time to do it. Or they change the like feature of that tool or like the features for that tool in a way they're just don't align with your company at all. And now you're like stuck in a weird spot where you're like, I guess we'll just stay on version 8 forever. Or we have to build something ourselves or move on to something new. So in that sense, and it makes me think a lot of like Next.js. It just like morphs over time, and it feels like every time they release a new version, it's something to like push you closer to Vercel or like push you to use Vercel. It's always some new feature that's only supported on their services. And then they give some like blog post that's like, hey, you can self-host this, and we promise it's easy, but they're lying. But really, what I'm saying is Vercel kind of sucks. There you go. There's my hot take. Vercel, hire me.
Damn, that was spicy from you.
I just had to let it boil up.
It took 15 episodes for your first spicy take.
It takes a long time to boil water, you know.
You had 2 coffees today, didn't you?
Yeah. Yeah. So by this time next year, we'll have the second hot take from Dylan. All right. I think we've been talking a decent amount of this stuff. I feel like we covered this topic pretty well. Curious if anyone has any last points. Otherwise, do we want to transition into stand up? All right, Scott, what's up with you?
Oh, geez. Okay. Well, I kind of finally made the feature I was working on forever quite resilient. I'm building like one more feature on top of it. I was able to, in the last 2 days, get back to the feature I was working on before, which was like a search palette. I'm finalizing that. And then my team is switching over to a different project. Essentially, they took they took the two most senior folks on the team who were working on a new version of what we build. Basically, just like AI backend, and they decided to form a team around that. So now there is a new version of that team that's just going to be a backend team for now. And we're taking over like another tool, another internal tool. So that's exciting. Going to Rhode Island this weekend with Brittany. That's exciting. Fixed siding, the siding, or sorry, I fixed the side door on my house with my friend Scott and Scott Incorporated. Basically put some new trim up, and then we had to deal with a can of worms, which is like every time we open something up here, there's like concrete poured right up against wood, and it's an absolute nightmare, and it's a can of worms. But we got the work done. We got the screen door back on. The screen door is kind of a POS, and I realize I'm gonna paint it and see if I can make it look nice. So happy to get that done. Um, and then I'm not sure if I'm supposed to mention this, but I had dinner with
Wow.
you and Dylan, Matt. I don't know if that's like a secret. We're supposed to be talking about that, but we had dinner recently. And it was nice.
Yeah, we know each other in real life.
We
Crazy.
almost recorded a live episode.
Yeah.
We should have done some sort of like live, just like a 10-second clip or something and added it into the episode. All right, I'll give my home remodeling update. Recently got mini splits, getting new doors soon. So this is all very, very expensive. Next thing in my mind is, oh, now I need solar panels because I'm powering these mini splits with electricity. So maybe next year I'm gonna get solar panels. So maybe we'll have a whole episode on solar panels because that's really relevant to our work experience. And then what else is going on? I don't know. Got a couple trips coming up. Got like a wedding this weekend. Gonna go to Louisiana, down in the Cajun South, and hang out at my mom's house that I've never been to, so that should be cool. And then gonna have a pretty chill Christmas this year. That's pretty much it. Work's been going pretty good. I've been doing this thing called Web Guild, sort of like if at other companies that have like chapters or whatever you want to call them, where like groups of engineers in specific fields will get together and try to solve like problems. So I've been like leading that at Whoop. I was kind of like hating it, but I've slowly started to like enjoy it, and now it's almost over, and I got to find somebody else to take over. So it's been like a really interesting learning experience and maybe an opportunity for growth. So that's been pretty cool. Like if you asked me last week, I'd be like, this is the worst thing ever. But I've had like some pretty good experiences with it more recently, so I'm a little bit more optimistic about it. So
I feel like if you aren't in the industry, the way that you described it, Dylan, almost makes it sound like it's a cult.
it kind of is. It's like to me, it's actually more like an unofficial union or something. It's like you kind of get together with like-minded people within your company and like you share problems that you're having. It's like group therapy for front-end engineers is really what it is.
Let's see.
Yeah. What's up
Yeah,
with
I'm
you,
trying to
Matt?
think. I feel like I actually wasn't prepared for stand up today. I don't know. I've been churning out a ton of build performance changes to an internal tool at work. Although, like, ironically, some of those are actually maybe regressing performance. So I need to look into that. We're just trying to like parallelize more things in our build tool, which is, there's limits in which you can actually get benefits out of doing that change. So that's a little unfortunate. Outside of that, yeah, I don't know. I've just been chilling. I'm contemplating getting arc raiders. We talked a little bit about arc raiders in the last episode. Dylan's been convincing me more and more. I found some like old unused gift cards, and so I redeemed those. And now I have like $100 I can spend on games. So I need to use those.
Yeah. I think people should try it. It's fun. I know people get like really turned off by the idea that you die and then you lose everything, but the game's pretty. It's like pretty casual in a sense that it gives you a lot even when you die. So it makes it pretty easy.
Yeah.
And then just the game world and the like sound and the enemies and everything in it are just like really well polished. So it's a fun experience.
Yeah. And then let's see, not this weekend, but next weekend, we're planning like sort of another physical in-person meetup with another friend. So that should be fun. Hopefully the three of us can actually hang out instead of Scott needing to continue to paint his house or do something around his house. We'll see.
It'll probably happen.
Yeah.
It
No, I think
depends.
that's about it. Yeah, it depends. All right. Yeah, I think that about ends it. Thanks to the listener for if you listened all this way. Leave us a review. We appreciate it. Share it with a friend. Yeah.
Yeah. Give us at least 5 stars out of 10 stars, and that would be pretty good.
I think there's only
Give
5
us-
stars.
Make sure you give us 7 stars out of 5. That way we get boosted.
Rate,
All right.
review, like, and subscribe.
Cool.
Yeah. Smash that subscribe button.
Later.
All right. See ya.